an American wildlife photographer with a knack for chasing danger in pursuit of the perfect shot. Had spent weeks tracking lions across the vast African savanna. The golden grasses stretched endlessly beneath a sky too wide to comprehend. And the sun beat down with the weight of a silent drum. He was crouched low in the brush, camera in hand, focused on a distant herd of impalas, when a faint, broken sound reached his ears, high-pitched, weak, almost swallowed by the wind. It didn't belong. He lowered his camera, listened again. There it was, a soft, desperate cry. Instinct kicked in. He moved carefully but quickly, weaving through the tall grass, the sound growing clearer with each step. Then he saw it. A lion cub, no more than a few months old, lay in the dust. Its tawny fur matted with blood and dirt. Its leg was twisted unnaturally, and shallow breaths moved its small chest. Around it, a circle of vultures had formed, silent and still for now, but their eyes gleamed with hunger, their intentions clear. Ethan froze. His training told him not to interfere. Nature, after all, had its own laws, but this wasn't a moment he could photograph and walk away from. The cub tried to lift its head, then collapsed again. A vulture hopped forward, just inches away. Ethan clapped his hands and shouted. The birds startled, flapping upward in a chaotic storm of wings before settling nearby. Watching, he stepped closer to the cub. Crouching down, it bared tiny teeth, too weak to be threatening. Ethan spoke softly, words the cub wouldn't understand but tone it might. He reached into his bag, pulled out a water bottle, and poured a little into a cap, holding it near the cub's mouth. It drank, barely. Around him, the savanna buzzed with heat and tension. He knew predators could be near. The mother could be near. But there was no sign of another lion. No fresh tracks. This cub had been left behind, injured, vulnerable, and forgotten. Ethan took off his jacket, slowly wrapping it around the cub. Its body trembled. He hesitated. This wasn't part of the job. It wasn't what he came here for. But something in the cub's eyes, something defiant in the face of death, reached him. Carefully, he lifted the small body into his arms. The cub didn't resist. The vultures screeched in protest from a distance. But none dared approach. With the weight of a life in his arms and the savanna stretching endlessly ahead, Ethan began the long walk back toward his camp, unaware that this fragile encounter would change the course of both their lives. Without a second thought, Ethan lunged forward, arms wide, shouting at the circling vultures like a madman. They scattered, wings flapping violently, some screeching in protest, but he didn't stop until they were pushed far enough away to buy some breathing room. He dropped to his knees beside the injured cub, its breathing shallow and rapid. His hands, usually steady behind the camera, now trembled as he inspected the wound. A deep gash ran along its hind leg, likely from a failed escape or a brutal encounter. Blood had crusted over, but infection was a real risk. Digging through his backpack, Ethan pulled out the meager supplies he had, a small first aid kit. Meant for minor human injuries, not exactly made for big cats. Still, he worked with what he had. He poured bottled water over the wound, cleaning away the dirt and dried blood as gently as he could. The cub winced but didn't fight. Ethan ripped a clean t-shirt into strips and wrapped them carefully around the leg, tying it tight to stop further bleeding. The sun dipped low, and the light faded into twilight. But Ethan didn't move. He gathered branches, dry grass, and stones, forming a loose perimeter around the cub. Anything that might slow a predator. He built a small fire nearby, not too close to scare the cub, but enough to keep larger threats at bay. The savannah came alive at night. A symphony of howls, growls, and rustling footsteps in the dark. But Ethan stayed put. He draped his jacket over the cub to keep it warm and sat beside it, flashlight in hand, scanning the horizon. Every few minutes, he checked the cub's breathing, offering it more water. He didn't sleep. The night stretched on, long and tense. Hyenas laughed in the distance. At one point, a pair of glowing eyes appeared at the edge of the firelight. Jackals. Maybe, but Ethan stood tall, waving the light and shouting until they disappeared. He never let his guard down. He didn't know if the cub would make it through the night, but he wasn't going to let it die alone. Surrounded by scavengers, there was something about its stubborn will to live, even as its body failed, that anchored him there. Hours passed. The cub shifted slightly, pressing its small head against Ethan's side. A faint gesture of trust. He didn't move. Dawn eventually crept over the savannah, painting the sky in muted oranges and pinks. The vultures had long since given up, and the worst of the night had passed. The cub was still breathing. It had survived one more night. Ethan exhaled slowly, his body aching and cold, but his resolve unshaken. Whatever it took, he was going to get this cub help. One reckless decision had turned into a promise, and now there was no going back. The sun rose slowly over the savannah, casting long shadows and bathing the golden grass in soft, amber light. Ethan sat beside the lion cub, who was now awake, alert, and visibly stronger. Through the night, its breathing had steadied, and though its leg was still bandaged and tender, it had managed to shift, even lift its head without collapsing. Ethan had fed it small pieces of dried meat and given it water in slow sips. Now, as the warmth of the new day spread across the land, the cub pushed itself up, shaky at first. But it stood, wobbly legs, unsure steps, but standing nonetheless. Ethan watched in silence, heart full and heavy. He knew what came next. This wasn't a pet, wasn't a companion to keep. This was a creature of the wild, born to run beneath open skies, not stay tethered to a man's world. As much as he wanted to protect it forever, keeping it would only weaken what made it strong. So, with a quiet breath, he rose to his feet, slowly unwrapped the makeshift bandage, checked the wound, it had begun to scab over, and stepped back. The cub looked up at him, blinking slowly, ears twitching at the sounds of the wind and distant birds. Ethan pointed toward the trees at the edge of the savannah, where the wild waited. "Go," he said softly, though his voice cracked. The cub hesitated, then turned and began to limp toward the brush. Each step felt like a goodbye. Ethan's throat tightened, a weight pressing down on his chest. He had spent just a single night with this creature, but it had carved itself into him deeper than he expected. The silence between them now was louder than any roar. Just as the cub reached the edge of the tall grass, it paused. It turned its small head, looking back at him. Their eyes met, wild and human. Two different lives that had crossed paths by chance. For a moment, time stopped. No wind, no sound, just that final glance. Ethan felt something break inside him. He nodded, unable to speak, barely able to breathe. Then the cub turned again and disappeared into the grass. swallowed by the wild it belonged to. Ethan stood there long after it had gone, staring at the spot where he'd last seen it, fighting back the tears he hadn't expected. He wiped his face, not sure if it was sweat or grief. He'd saved a life, done what was right, but it didn't make the parting any easier. The savannah was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. But Ethan knew better. Somewhere out there, a lion walked free because of him. And as he picked up his camera and began the long walk back, he realized that sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones you don't capture on film, but carry with you forever. Months later, Ethan returned to the same stretch of savannah where everything had changed. He wasn't just chasing photos now, he was chasing a memory. A sense of unfinished business. The dry season had passed, and the landscape had shifted. Greener in places, harsher in others. He moved with practiced ease. Camera slung over his shoulder. Boots coated in dust. The light was perfect, the kind that kissed every blade of grass and made animals glow like myths. He'd taken some incredible shots already. Elephants crossing a river at dawn. A cheetah perched on a termite mound, but something kept pulling him deeper into the bush. Back to the area where he'd found the injured cub. He wanted to see if it had made it. If it had grown strong, wild, and free. But as the sun began to drop behind the hills, Ethan realized he'd wandered too far. The familiar landmarks had vanished, and the trail he'd followed had faded behind him. He checked his GPS, dead. The trees around him thickened, shadows lengthened, and the usual calm of the savannah gave way to an eerie silence. Then he heard it, the low, guttural growl that shakes something ancient in your spine. He turned slowly, from between the trees. Golden eyes blinked in the half-light. One lion stepped forward, then another, and another. Within seconds, he was surrounded. 5 adult lions, strong, silent, and watching. They didn't charge. They didn't roar. They simply circled, tightening the ring. Their eyes locked onto him. Ethan froze, heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. There was nowhere to run, no tree to climb. The camera in his hands suddenly felt absurd, useless. He raised his arms slightly, tried to make himself look bigger, tried not to show fear, though every cell in his body screamed. He spoke softly, barely above a whisper. "Easy, I'm not here to hurt you." One lion stepped closer, a large male with a dark mane. Eyes steady, unreadable. Another flanked him, low to the ground, muscles coiled. Ethan knew the signs. This wasn't curiosity, it was assessment, and he didn't pass. Just as the nearest lion tensed to pounce, a sharp, short growl rang out from the side. The group paused. A 6th lion entered the clearing, smaller than the rest, but with a distinct scar on its hind leg. Ethan's breath caught. It couldn't be. The lion stepped between him and the others. Posture alert but calm. It looked at Ethan, head tilted ever so slightly. Recognition flickered in its amber eyes. The others backed off slowly, one by one, until the circle opened. The scarred lion stayed for a few moments longer, then turned and disappeared into the brush. Ethan stood frozen, lungs burning, heart racing. Somehow, impossibly, the cub he'd saved had become his savior. And in the heart of the wild, a debt had been remembered. In that heart-stopping moment when death seemed inches away, the savannah held its breath. Ethan stood frozen, surrounded by powerful, silent predators, each one capable of ending him in a heartbeat. He had no weapon, no escape, nothing but a thudding heart and the regret of straying too far. Then, out of the thick brush behind the circling lions, a sudden roar shattered the stillness, a thunderous, commanding sound that cut through the rising tension like a blade. A lion burst into the clearing, powerful and fast, its golden mane rippling in the wind. The others stopped immediately, their heads snapping toward the newcomer. It wasn't just another lion. It was the lion. The scar on its hind leg was unmistakable. It was the cub, the same one Ethan had cradled in his arms under a sky full of stars. The one he'd saved from death. Now it was grown, fierce, and undeniable in its presence. The young lion stepped between Ethan and the pride, its roar still echoing across the trees. It didn't bare its teeth or attack. It didn't need to. Its stance, its eyes, its sheer force of will were enough. The pride hesitated, then slowly began to back away. No challenge, no resistance. One by one, they turned, disappearing into the tall grass with quiet grace. Until the clearing was still again. The wind picked up, rustling the grass, brushing past Ethan like a breath from the earth itself. The lion stood a moment longer, glancing back at Ethan, not with wild suspicion, but something else, something deeper, recognition, gratitude. Its eyes met his with a calm that spoke louder than any sound. "I remember." Then, without ceremony, it turned and followed its pride into the wild, its tail flicking once like a quiet goodbye. Ethan stood there in stunned silence, his chest rising and falling as the adrenaline drained from his limbs. Around him, the savannah returned to its rhythm, the distant cry of birds, the rustle of unseen creatures, the whisper of the wind. He was untouched, alive, and utterly changed. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had once carried a fragile cub wrapped in a torn t-shirt, and felt something tighten in his throat. This wasn't just survival, it was something bigger, a moment of connection in a world that rarely offers second chances. Nature had given him a miracle, not loud or dramatic, but quiet, fierce, and unforgettable. A silent thank you written in instinct and memory. And as he finally turned to find his way back, the savannah stretched out before him, not just a place of danger and beauty, but now a place of unspoken bonds and unlikely grace.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.